Hello and welcome to Democracy Matters. I am Marvi Sirmed, and today we are talking about what our panelists would call crisis of Islam. I will introduce to you our panelists today in a moment. Let me introduce what we are going to talk about first. You would have heard the crisis of blasphemy laws in the Muslim world. Well, United States Commission on International Religious Freedom has found that at least 70 countries have blasphemy laws as of 2018. These laws were present in 18 Middle Eastern countries, North African countries, 8 countries in Americas, 18 Asia Pacific countries, 14 European countries, and 12 sub Saharan African countries. What is wrong with these laws is precisely what we are going to discuss with our panelists. We are very fortunate to have Mustafa Akyol, who is a senior fellow at Cato Institute. He has been contributing our opinion writer in the New York Times since 2013. He is author, journalist from Turkey, and he has a very, very unique point of view on Islam and on blasphemy laws, apostasy laws, etc. Without much ado, welcome, Mustafa. Thank you very much for coming to our show.
Thank you, Marvi. It's a pleasure to speak to you on this. And I know that you have worked on this issue in Pakistan. I know you have been sometimes in risk in Pakistan because it's a country, unfortunately, it's a beautiful country that I love, but there are some pockets of fanaticism that are attacking people in the name of
Absolutely.
Islam. And as a Muslim myself, when I look at it, I feel pain and I feel sad. These things should not happen in the
Yeah.
name of Islam. We believe our religion is a religion of compassion. God, mercy is we recite Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, God, the
Yeah.
compassionate, the merciful. But a lot of things are happening in the world today, in some parts of the world, in the
Mm.
name of Islam, that are not compassionate, that are quite the contrary, cruel. And unfortunately, blasphemy laws are one channel through which that cruelty is expressed
Yeah.
and performed.
One thing that I noticed was you have a very, very unique point of view on not only religion, not only Islam, but also on the blasphemy laws as well. One very striking sentence that I read in one of your old articles was that true Muslims do not kill blasphemers. Would you care to explain that a bit?
Here is the problem with the approach of banning blasphemy. We Muslims and like Christians, religious people believe in sacred values, right? So I believe my prophet is sacred. I believe the Kaaba or Allah, God, or the Quran is sacred. So we have a deep emotional attachment to it.
Yeah.
Now, but not everybody believes in them. Also, people might understand them differently from what I believe in. Like Sunnis have a different view of early Islam, Shiites have a different view of early Islam, for example. And when people express their views from their own perspective, whatever that is, that will inevitably at some point come across as not, fully on board with me. I respect the Prophet Muhammad. Someone will have negative views about the Prophet Muhammad.
Mm.
Now, and it is inevitable that I won't like it. I will be disturbed by that. That's normal. And I think that's legitimate. The question is, what do you do in that situation?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we have pockets of ideological rigidity, religious fanaticism in Islam, whose answer is, oh, we will go and silence those people.
Yeah.
We'll put them in jail. We will flog them. We will even kill them. We will even execute them. So this is happening in the name of Islam, and Pakistan is unfortunately a burning case. Now, I look into this from an Islamic point of view, and where does this come from? The idea that blasphemers should be punished. Well, to be fair, it is coming from medieval jurisprudence. The Sharia Islamic law was interpreted by medieval jurists we call the fuqaha, who built Islamic fiqh. And if you look at the four Sunni schools, Hanbali, the Hanafi, Shafi, and Maliki, they all have verdicts about punishing blasphemers. But what I look more carefully is this. Yes, jurists thought like that. They also justified slavery, which doesn't luckily exist in the world. Not everything medieval jurisprudence says is not eternally valid in the name of Islam. So where does it come from exactly? And one thing that is important is that we first look in the Quran. There is nothing in the Quran about punishing blasphemers. There are some verses about God will punish them in the afterlife, but that is something up to God. We're not God's agents in this world, who punish people in His name. There are also a few verses in the Quran which tell Muslims that there will be blasphemers, there will be people who joke about your faith, who mock your faith, but what to do? Not kill them, not silence them. A verse in Surah Al-Nisa says, just do not sit with those people if they are mocking your faith. So that's the only verse in the Quran that directly relates to the issue of blasphemy. And it was revealed in Medina when Muslims had power. And it says, just do not sit with people if they are mocking your faith, which would mean do not buy a magazine if there's some cartoon in it that offends your religion, as it happened in France. Yeah. If there are people who say things that are hurtful, just walk away and don't listen to them. Change the channel or don't listen to their conversations. Maybe refuse. Even you can boycott. You can protest even things. But there's nothing about silencing. We also have incidents in the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he sees some harsh words against himself, and his followers say, should we do something against them? He says, no, just let them go. There are incidents like that, and I told them in detail in my forthcoming book. There are other incidents where the Prophet ordered some executions or some violence, and that is the basis of the jurists which thought that blasphemy laws should be punished. But again, in my forthcoming book, I look more carefully into those incidents. And there are incidents where the person is not just a blasphemer, but also somebody who provoked war against Muslims, went to Medina, from Medina to Mecca, for example, Kab in al-Ashraf. He was one person executed for what people call blasphemy, but he actually was not just a blasphemer. He went from Medina to Mecca and waged war, provoked a war against Muslims. There are other incidents of individuals like that, yes, who were blasphemers, but also who killed a Muslim. And it was a time of active war. Muslims were in a war of survival with aggressive pagans from Mecca and their allies. So there are some incidents of violence. But when we look more carefully, I think we can make the argument was that actually those people were not targeted because they were blasphemers, but they were active enemies, which did violent things like attacking caravans and killing Muslims and so on and so forth. So therefore, I think an Islamic case can be made to say that the basic sources of Islam actually do not justify. This would be a reformist argument because these people who are acting in violent terms rely on medieval jurisprudence, which brings us to the issue of, well, is everything written in medieval jurisprudence books in Islam, fiqh books, are eternally valid? Well, if you stick to that, yes, you will have a lot of conflicts with human rights as it is happening in different parts of the Muslim world, on blasphemy, on apostasy, on free speech, on women's rights. There will be issues. But I think it's past time for us Muslims, as various scholars have argued since the late 19th century, to rethink these issues. And to put an understanding of Islam, which is not coercive, which is not violent, but which rather shares its virtues through example and through preaching and through practice.
Yeah, Mustafa, but I completely understand your argument, and your argument that Quran, when Quran directly talks about blasphemer, it does not ask you of killing them. But we have been given examples of how Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, ordered his companions to kill those Jewish poetesses. One woman poet was killed while she was pregnant by a companion of the Holy Prophet because she was blasphemer. What do you say about that?
Well, that is what I was referring to. Those people, when we look into their stories, were not killed because merely they were blasphemers. They
But
were
a
killed
pregnant
because
woman cannot
active
wage war.
enmity. Sorry?
But a pregnant woman who just was a poet uh, cannot be, we can't imagine she would, wage an act of war on Muslims.
That person, I mean, that you're referring to, which I mentioned in my book,
Hmm.
that as we know from the sources, historical sources, she was executed because she had called for the killing of Prophet Muhammad himself. And I'll also explain this to you that not everything the Prophet did in the 7th century Arabia context is also applicable today. So I'm
Absolutely.
not saying that, I mean, first of all, we should understand things within their own context.
Hmm.
And even there, what the Prophet did. I mean, Prophet had several wives. I mean, I'm not condoning today as an ideal. It was the custom of that society. The Prophet, according to not the Quran, but Hadith literature, ordered a stoning of adulterers. I'm
Hmm.
not going to condone it today.
Hmm.
There are corporal punishments in early Islam. What I would, when I look into those issues as a Muslim today, I would say, well, some of these things are just the culture and the norm and the conditions of that time.
Hmm.
It was a brutal world in which Islam was born.
Yeah.
And I would ask why the Prophet was drawn into doing these things.
Hmm.
I mean, when Islam was born in Mecca in the year to 610, with the first revelation, it did not start a war. Muslims did not start attacking people. They were trying to preach their religion. And early verses in the Meccan period call tell non-Muslims, pagans, to you your religion and to me mine. There are verses like that. Uh, Now, I have a chapter in my book, forthcoming book. I say, what would have happened if the polytheists of Mecca said, "That's fine, okay, your religion, you're monotheists, we're worshiping our idols." In that case, the Prophet would never leave Mecca. There would be never battles between Meccans and polytheists. So there would be Muslims would never have a sword in their hands.
Hmm.
But they had to because they were not allowed to practice their religion. In other words, I believe the first demand of Islam in 7th century Arabia was freedom of speech and religion, which was not given to them, and they were persecuted and they were tortured, so they had to leave. So it was a brutal world, and ultimately they got swords in their hands and they waged wars, and they did whatever was done at that time in the culture of that time. I'm not seeing everything in that culture as
Yeah.
eternally valid. So I think one thing is looking into those stories and even there trying to understand the nuances, because even there we have examples of Prophet doing, when somebody just insults him, do nothing against him. Just that insult isn't.
Hmm.
But there are poets who insulted him, but also calling for war against Muslims. Oh, that changed the dynamics. In that time, it was a very understandable thing. So I'm making the case that, first of all, we should be able to distinguish the context of early Islam from the eternal values of Islam. And then even in that context, we should see, even there, when we look more carefully into the stories, they're not as violent as some of the violent Muslims today, unfortunately, think that they are and take it
Hmm.
as precedent.
That's a very interesting interpretation and look at, very interesting argument. And
Well, I learned this from one great scholar from your country, Fazlur Rahman Malik. He was a great scholar of Islam who couldn't survive in Pakistan. He ultimately had to come to the United States. And he brought this vision that it's called a historical interpretation or a historicist interpretation. His idea was that, well, the Quran didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, the Quran came from God, but it didn't come to a vacuum. It came to a context. It
Hmm.
was a society, and the behavior of that society ultimately was what God was responding to. So there was slavery there, and the Quran speaks about it and actually improves the conditions of the slave. So women had very little rights, so Quran gave them more rights, but not equal rights yet,
Hmm.
because that was the Quran faced a society and Prophet faced a society. He was a member of the society. And I think he made the argument that we should be able to distinguish what is historical from what is religious. I mean, the same thing for Judaism. I mean, if you read the Old Testament and if you look at the Prophet Moses and some of the things he did after,
Yeah.
saving the Israelites, and there's violence, there's war with the pagans, the Amalekites, pretty brutal stories. There are some brutal laws, but I think most Jews have been able to make the argument that, well, that was different. It was
Mm,
a different time. We live in a different world today.
mm.
And the injunctions, the commandments there were not eternally valid. It was just temporary. And I think in Islam, we need to make the same switch. Some of us have done, the tradition has done here and there, but there's a very strong still textualist and literalist approach, which is harming Islam. So that's the basis of my argument.
Yeah, that's actually very fascinating, view to study more. And so while you were, talking about freedom of expression, and you alluded, you cited what happened in France. I was just recalling Prime Minister of Pakistan's various statements on that. He, alongside the President Erdogan of Turkey and Mahathir Mohamad, three of them, they, you know, they got together and they talked about this Islamophobia. And then Erdogan and Prime Minister Khan both wrote a letter to French Mr. Macron. And just yesterday, our Prime Minister has once again said that, West needs to understand our predicament. We just cannot tolerate anything against Prophet Muhammad. And they should understand, because in the name of freedom of expression, we cannot allow it, because the West also does not allow many things. And he just, stayed short of saying Holocaust. That many Pakistanis actually keep saying that in the West you cannot deny Holocaust and you will be booked and you will be, whatever, but you can insult Prophet Muhammad in the name of freedom of expression. What is your take on that?
Well, thank you for asking that. My take is that, first of all, there is some basis for the criticism of France by pointing to those double standards on free speech. I myself recently have written an article, and on the one hand, I said I'm with France against terrorists, and certainly any country should deserve support against any violence, horrific violence like that. But France can do better if it raises its own freedom of speech standards, because Muslims look into France and say, oh, it's not just Holocaust denial. I mean, there are laws in France about insulting the flag is a crime, insulting the national anthem is a crime. Of course, in France, people are not beheaded or jailed for life for denying the Holocaust or insulting the flag. They're much minor offenses. But yes, people can be fined, even prison sentences for denying the Holocaust in France and Germany, a few countries. However, this is not the whole West. This is a few countries which have a history with Nazism and fascism and so on and so forth. In America, you can do anything. In America, you can be a Holocaust denier. You can be a neo-Nazi. I mean, people will, of course, not like you, rightly so, and you will be criticized, and you will be, but you will not be legally prosecuted. It has higher standards of freedom. And I think, well, honestly, I think America's standards of freedom of speech is better than most of the standards of free speech in continental Europe, because Muslims, when they look into this, they think, well, you're not allowing this, insulting the Prophet Muhammad. What about other laws? They're asking these questions. I'm not saying this to say that Holocaust denial is something good or righteous, or no, it's disgusting, because yes, close to 6 million Jews were murdered, massacred, genocide. I mean, they were subject to a genocide by Nazis. That's something evil. We should not minimize these things. So I see sometimes Muslims making fun of Holocaust to show that, there is a double standard here. That's very wrong. Iran every year was, for what, doing Holocaust denial contests or something like that. That's pretty stupid, actually. But yes, I mean, West should raise its freedom standards, certain Western countries, so there is no double standard here. But also, and by the way, that's true for not just freedom of speech, but on the freedom to wear a hijab, for example. I mean, I've been very critical of some expressions of French secularism, laïcité, where hijab is banned in high schools or in public offices. I think UK or US have higher standards there. On the other hand, those little limitations in the West cannot justify like killing somebody, beheading somebody for blasphemy. Nobody does that. I mean, yes, if you insult the national anthem in France, you will be, I don't know, maybe given a fine or maybe very short prison sentence. I don't know the details of law. Some people say it's just a fine. But they don't behead people. They don't massacre people. They don't put people in death row and so on and so forth. And the other thing is, in Pakistan, what I see is that blasphemy laws are used sometimes to go after people who are really blasphemers, which is, morally criticizable, but I think we should not be a crime. But even just there, it becomes a way to accuse anybody that you don't like. I mean, Asya Bibi, she had a quarrel with workers on her farm. It was probably some jealousy and little thing there. I mean, I know in cases of where people have a land dispute and the other person is a Christian, and you can say he insulted the Prophet, and you can get away with that. So Pakistan has a burning problem here. Pakistan is not bringing any honor to the Ummah by persecuting innocent people in the name of Islam. And this should stop. And yes, we can criticize France for some shortcomings of liberal democracy, which I myself do, on hijab issues, on free speech issues. But it's not a reason to justify what is going on. I think those people in Pakistan who defend blasphemy laws, they could be people in the government or people in Islamist groups, sometimes force the government, to be more authoritarian or vigilant on these issues. They should understand that they are not doing any good to Islam. They are portraying Islam as a religion which cannot stand hearing anything that is critical of Islam, which is immature, which is not a civilized point of view. And I would say they don't have a basis in the Quran. I mean, there are verses in the Quran where God quotes blasphemers. There are verses in the Quran where the pagans of Mecca say to Prophet Muhammad, he's a madman or he's a sorcerer. God quotes that and says, no, he's not. So there's a dialogue. So if people say things about Islam that are bad, they will say things about Islam that are bad because they're not Muslim, and they look into history of Islam, they see things that are disturbing. That's normal. As a Muslim, your duty is not to jail them, to attack them, but to say, well, maybe, let's have a conversation on this. Maybe you understand Islam this way, but this is how we understand it. That will be service to Islam, not killing, jailing, terrorizing innocent people.
Absolutely. So where do we go from here now? I mean, shouldn't blasphemy laws be repealed throughout the world, wherever they exist?
I'm in favor of abolishing all blasphemy laws everywhere, everywhere in the world. I mean, in some countries, they're in the laws, but they're not really implemented that much. I mean, I think that's the case in Europe. In Italy, I know it's in the laws. Or if they are implemented in very extreme, there are some fines and so on and so forth. In the Muslim majority world, and in India too, by the way, we have another problem on the other side of the border. That's this time Hindu fanaticism and Hindu supremacism.
And it all is happening without any particular blasphemy law covering Hinduism. So it's just vigilantism.
It's vigilantism. Yeah, it's not in the laws. It's not the laws of India that are problematic. But once you have religious supremacism, fascism, it can come out. And so actually it's interesting that on the two sides of the subcontinent, we see vigilantism, sometimes in the name of Hinduism, sometimes in the name of Islam, which to me signals that maybe the problem is not Hinduism or Islam per se, but a aggressive political culture, which wants to, or
Yeah.
patriarchal political culture, which expresses itself in the name of those great religious traditions.
In Pakistan, we keep hearing in favor these arguments in favor of the laws. Progressive, well-meaning people who I mean, who identify with democratic, liberal democratic values, they say that the existence of blasphemy, anti-blasphemy laws is somehow a buffer between the violence and the and peace, because they think that existence of these laws can placate the the aggressive religious sentiment among the people. If they see some blasphemer,
Mm.
instead committing violence, they have recourse to law. So the law needs to be there. What is your take on that?
I don't agree with that. First of all, the fact that there is a blasphemy law, I think rather empowers vigilante groups, which want to sometimes take the law in their hands.
Hmm.
Also, I mean, I don't think that if there's no blasphemy law in a country, millions will come up and start insulting Islam. I think quite the contrary. I think the reason there are insults against Islam, I think the reason there are so many insults against Prophet Muhammad, cartoons and things like that, is because we want to punish these things through force.
That's
Uh,
yeah.
I mean, all this obsession about drawing cartoons of Prophet Muhammad in the West, which I don't like as a Muslim, I don't want to see that. But this began because some Muslims said, we will kill you if you do this. And
Hmm.
other people say, who are you to tell us what to do in our own country? That's in France or Denmark or wherever. I mean, this whole incident began, I mean, the young will not remember, but I remember in the 80s, but with the Salman Rushdie affair. I mean, the book of Salman Rushdie, the novel Satanic Verses, was published in England, and Muslims started to burn the book, ban the book, attack the publishers. And this has become a global affair. If Muslims didn't respond in that way, they just looked the other way, nobody would read the book, and it was just a literary work. Nobody would remember that. So
Absolutely.
I think by blasphemy laws, by the urge to punish blasphemy by force,
Hmm.
Muslims are only more provoke more disrespect, offense against our prophet.
Yeah.
I mean, and for example, terrorism. I mean, we say like there are people who depict our prophet as a terrorist, and we go against it. Of
Hmm.
course, he was not. I mean, our prophet was not. But if you go and do terrorism in the name of your prophet, what does that do? I mean, what impression are you giving to the world? So I think Muslims should understand that by using coercive power in the name of Islam, they're not breeding, they're not cultivating respect to Islam, they're cultivating disrespect to Islam. They're not making people honor the Prophet. Maybe some people will be silent and say nothing, but they will deep down be very disrespectful. And I think the greatest power of any religion comes from not coercion, but from the virtue that it displays. If you display virtues in the name of Islam, and those would be tolerance, those would be civility, those would be open discussion, those would be forgiving even people with a negative view towards you, then people will say, wow, that's a wonderful religion, let me know more about this. They will show more respect. Maybe more people will be drawn to Islam, if that's the point. I mean, they don't have to be drawn to Islam, but they will have more respect. I think we are seeking respect in the wrong way. Uh,
Absolutely.
and some Muslims are seeking respect in the wrong way.
In
It
the
doesn't
wrong
come
way.
through violence and coercion.
Yeah.
It comes through virtue and tolerance.
Absolutely. I mean, I really hope that the people, especially Pakistani people who are listening to this, who are listening to you right now, they think again. It's such a shame. I feel so ashamed that people like Fazlur Rahman, who have impact, who have influenced minds like yourself outside Pakistan, people in Pakistan, many people don't even know him. Many
Mhm.
people haven't even heard of him. So it's just it's really, really sad. My next question, Mustafa, is about this House of Representative in USA and Senate has also, they have jointly passed a resolution against the global blasphemy and apostasy laws. Uh, what else do you think the world, the free world can do to help us getting abolishment of blasphemy laws in our countries?
First of all, I support that resolution. I support all the efforts, global efforts, Western or global efforts to abolish blasphemy laws. And I think one thing that needs to be made clear, and there it's the Muslim scholars, ulama, it's the Muslim intellectuals, journalists, people who have a saying in their society. They can play a role if they understand, the value of this here.
Mhm.
The Muslim societies should be explained that blasphemy laws should be repealed, abolished, not because we want people to attack Islam and insult Islam.
Mhm.
No, we want to abolish these laws because innocent people are getting hurt. They're getting into jail. Their lives are being destroyed because of these laws. It doesn't bring any honor to Islam. It brings shame to Islam. I think because a lot of people in Pakistan think, oh my God, they want to insult our prophet, so they want to abolish these laws. So every day, everybody will insult our prophet. No, nobody is interested in doing that. I mean, there might be some obsessive anti-Islamic figures. I mean, I sometimes see on Twitter too who want to say something bad about Prophet Muhammad every day. I block them. I just or look the other way around. I mean,
Yeah.
there might be some people like that, but the main problem is that here's one example. America is one of the freest countries in the world when it comes to free speech.
Mhm.
You can say anything. Like, is this a country where Muslims living here hear about insults against Prophet Muhammad every day? No, people don't do that. I mean, there are some pockets. I mean, a few people made a movie in California a few years ago. There was the leader of one small church in Florida who wanted to burn a copy of the Quran. By the way, other Christians said, don't do that. That's disrespectful. I mean, a lot of people think that you shouldn't blaspheme because that's not nice. That's disrespectful. You should respect other religious traditions. People already have those virtues, not because the law dictates to them. It's just blasphemy laws are used to put innocent people in jail for being a Shia in a Sunni majority country, or it would be the other way around, in a Shia majority country, for persecuting Ahmadis, persecuting Christians, and it's a shame. So I'm certainly in favor of getting abolishing blasphemy laws, and also in the societal level, questioning this idea that Islam bans offensive speech to Islam. No, we shouldn't. We should, if it is rude, we should turn our face and look not into it, as the Quran tells us. Just do not sit with them. If it's an argument, we should hear the argument and show what is the Islamic way of responding to that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mustafa.
You're welcome.
Viewers, stay tuned to Democracy Matters, where we talk about democracy matters because democracy matters.